Alla fine degli anni 70 e inizio degli anni 80 a livello sicurezza c'era ben poco. Purtroppo furono gli anni di grossi e tragici incidenti. Dall'82 fu l'introduzione dei nuovi materiali, i compositi. Passammo dalle vetture classiche in metallo alle vetture composite. Un'altra data importante fu 4 anni fa, quando passammo al crash test vero e proprio. Oltre alla cellula di sopravvivenza fu introdotta la prova d'urto per provarla effettivamente.
What was the principle of the survival cell?
Diciamo che poniamo delle dimensioni minime di costruzione dello chassis, sia come abitabilità del pilota, sia come impiego di materiali. Diamo delle dimensioni minime e la qualità minima dei materiali da utilizzare.
Philippe Allio's incredible accident in the 1988 Mexican Grand Prix was proof that these worked. He emerged unscathed from his Lola.
Negli anni 50 e fino alla fine degli anni 70 il problema dell'incendio fu quello più grave. Oggi possiamo dire che fortunatamente è scomparso questo problema.
Formula One cars have to be fitted with soft fuel tanks, which, like the self-sealing valves and fuel lines, are of aviation standard. A well-indicated exterior cut-off switch and an on-board automatic fire extinguisher are also obligatory, while a tank of medical air will allow a driver to breathe for 30 seconds in a fire without risk of lung damage. In order to win, the constructors sometimes play the role of sorcerer's apprentice. It can't be much fun constantly striving against such tendencies.
È difficile dirlo perché entrano in gioco altri elementi, circuiti, piloti. È un equilibrio sempre difficile da trovare e, come dicevi tu prima, c'è una costante corsa da parte dei team per migliorare le prestazioni e da parte della federazione di contenerle in limiti di sicurezza.
So the governing body sometimes has to apply the brakes and put a stop to things.
Beh, è stato fatto qualche anno fa, adesso col motore atmosferico. Tra le altre ragioni per cui il turbo compressore è stato vietato è stata anche quella di ridurre le potenze a limiti più ragionevoli.
Yes, but surely on that point you failed, because normally aspirated engines promptly beat the times of the turbo cars.
Certamente, è il progresso. Se ci fossero stati ancora i turbo saremmo ancora più in là.
It was also imperative to ensure that Formula One cars, with their incredible grip, did not become ballistic missiles should they lose control. Consequently, the width of cars' slick tyres was limited in the early 80s. The governing body also fought a long battle to contain aerodynamic progress, which was constantly improving grip. It all started at the end of the 60s, when wings were first introduced, but their growth was soon limited after a series of structural failures. The situation reached a peak at the end of the 70s with ground effect. The ultimate in this development was Gordon Murray's Brabham, which was equipped with a fan to suck the car to the track. But it was banned after winning its only race. Colin Chapman introduced movable sides to the cars to prevent interference with the airflow under the car, and with a shaped underbody produced a Venturi effect, which also sucked the car to the track. This was the era of skirts, outlawed in 1983. Another important safety area was that of drivers' dress. To begin with, they wore blue overalls and reversed flat hat. In the 30s, Nuvolari wore a skull cap, but it wasn't until post-war that the helmet made its first appearance. Drivers in the 50s still preferred the lightness of a cotton shirt and cloth trousers to anything more robust. Helmets that covered drivers' ears appeared in the 60s, and at the same time they began to wear underwear and overalls made of fireproof materials. The governing body encouraged this by creating manufacturing standards, and these spread to helmets, while gloves and boots were also made in fireproof materials. This was how drivers fought their fear of fire, the scourge of the 70s. At the same time, circuits became better equipped, and in the 80s, the problem of safety was largely overcome.
Many of the tracks have become very safe, but the drivers have become very dangerous. And now it's a question of policing those drivers, not just when they reach Formula One, but when they start off from Formula France or Formula Italy, to Formula 3, to 3000, and finally to Formula One. The driving behaviour, as I see it today, is extremely poor, and that's a human problem.
Obviously, it is hard to protect the drivers from one another. But one area in which improvements could be made was at the start, the most dangerous part of the race, when the cars are still closely grouped. The principle of placing cars according to their speed in practice was adopted in 1933, the grid system, utilised in order to limit overtaking when the field was still closely bunched. But the cars became so wide that the system had to be fine-tuned to limit accidents, spacing cars further apart on the grid. A 2x2 grid replaced the previous 3-2-3 configuration, and that was then staggered. But now there was considerable distance between first and last on the grid. It was also necessary to replace the traditional dropping of the national flag with a system of traffic lights. Strange perhaps, but more visible, and now operated by a professional starter used to the tension and problems of Grand Prix starts. This was an attempt to prevent any repeat of accidents such as that at the start of the 1981 Belgian Grand Prix, when Siegfried Stohr ran into a mechanic from his own team who was trying to start his teammate's engine when the start was given. It also attempted to prevent the possibility of a car failing to start on the grid and being hit by another. This was tragically illustrated at the start of the 1982 Canadian Grand Prix when Riccardo Paletti hit Didier Pironi's stationary Ferrari at 120 mph. This was strangely ironic. 2 months later, Didier Pironi had to be cut from the wreckage of his Ferrari at Hockenheim. He was so badly injured that he thought Professor Watkins recommended immediate amputation, although this is disputed by those involved.
He had just recovered consciousness when I arrived at the accident. He recognized me. There was already some interception cars there with doctors aboard from the rescue organization at Hockenheim, and they had started to resuscitate his blood pressure by setting up intravenous transfusions. His legs were very badly damaged, and once we had his blood pressure under good control, then we were able to take the remains of the car apart so that he could be removed from the car without adding any damage to his legs. We brought the helicopter actually to the site of the accident, so when Mr. Pironi was removed from the car, he went straight into the helicopter and I took him to Heidelberg University Hospital.
Later, at his own request, Didier was moved to the Choisy Clinic in Paris, in the care of Professor Letournel, the orthopedic surgeon nicknamed the surgeon with hands of gold.
Le problème de l'urgence de sa jambe avait été réglé à Heidelberg et il fallait essayer de lui récupérer sa fonction. Et malheureusement, il avait des dégâts cutanés et des dégâts osseux extrêmement étendus au niveau de la jambe droite, de telle sorte que nous avons été obligés de réaliser ça étape par étape, et cela a demandé de plusieurs mois et de nombreuses interventions.
What sort of men face up to this extraordinary suffering?
Vous pouvez dire quel genre d'homme c'est face à la souffrance?
Je crois que face à la souffrance, il se comporte comme tous les autres, il ne l'aime pas. Et Didier n'aimait pas plus la souffrance que les autres. Ils avaient cependant, ils ont tous un courage assez exceptionnel, une volonté de récupération absolument fantastique. Ils sont d'ailleurs, lorsqu'ils sont accidentés, dans des conditions physiques fantastiques et formidables qui facilitent notre travail. Mais la douleur, eh bien, non, ils sont comme les autres.
Didier spent many months at Choisy. It was a tough time, punctuated by more than 20 operations under general anaesthetic.
La première chose qu'il m'a demandé, c'était si je pensais qu'il pourrait un jour remonter dans une voiture de Formule 1. Et je lui ai dit que c'était très vraisemblable, et je le pensais très sincèrement. Je crois que mon devoir de traumatologue, c'est aux pilotes de Formule 1, comme à tous les autres accidentés, de redonner aux blessés les possibilités d'effectuer ce qu'ils effectuaient auparavant. Et aux pilotes de Formule 1, de remonter dans une voiture. D'ailleurs, Didier, lorsqu'il nous a laissés, était à la veille de remonter dans une voiture de Formule 1, ce qui était pour lui et pour moi une immense joie.
Absolument, c'est ma principale motivation. Je veux dire, quand je fais de la rééducation tous les jours, quand j'essaie tous les jours de plier mon pied droit à droite à gauche, de l'enfoncer devant en arrière, c'est en pensant à une pédale d'accélérateur et une pédale de frein. Et quand je bouge mon pied gauche, c'est en pensant à une pédale d'embrayage. Donc c'est ma principale motivation de guérison, c'est sûr.
Injured in August 1982, it wasn't until 4 years later that Didier drove a Formula One car again. Gérard Larousse, who was there, was very impressed with his determination.
Il faisait très attention à ce qu'on ne voit pas le handicap qu'il avait, je me souviens. Et quand il s'est glissé dans la voiture, certain que dans sa tête, ça devait tourner à 100 à l'heure.
The test took place at Dijon in a Ligier during a closely guarded private session.
Il avait tourné très bien, de manière très constante, à la Didier, quoi. C'était un type tellement déterminé et volontaire. Avec une bonne voiture, Didier voulait redevenir champion du monde.
His future, however, was already sealed. We use his recovery as an example of safety in Formula One racing, but it never reached its logical conclusion. 4 years later, Didier was killed driving Colibri, a powerful offshore powerboat. In his impatience to get back into Formula One, Didier had instead opted for an aquatic version. It was ironic and cruel that it should have killed him. The moral of the story is that racing remains racing and drivers remain drivers. In spite of all the efforts and all the progress that has been made in safety, it would be wrong to believe that you could turn this high-risk sport into a secure and innocent game. These days, Grand Prix drivers pay for their sport less frequently with their lives. But accidents happen and will continue to happen. They are an integral part of motor racing. But constant vigilance is also vital, particularly concerning technical innovation, if one is to avoid the terrible toll of the 50s and 60s, when each year it was inevitable that one driver in 10 would not survive the season.